All right, so the next couple of bones, I'm going to actually talk about all the arm bones kind of in one. So the first bone that we're going to have of your upper arm is the humerus, and when you look at the humerus, it's kind of got this ball of that ball and socket joint. Then we have the radius and the ulna. The radius is actually closest to your thumb, and the ulna is closest to your pinky. So when you're in anatomical position, your radius is going to be lateral, and your ulna is going to be medial. So that kind of becomes important here in a little bit. So I want to talk about the humerus first. I'm going to use both this one as well as ones that are not together with the rest of the bones. So we're going to kind of look at them from both an anterior and a posterior aspect. So when we're looking at these two, this side is anterior, this side is posterior. So the big thing is, how the heck do you know that? The big thing is you need to look at both the head, but also you need to look at the bottoms here. So if you look at this one has a much bigger kind of hole in it, sort of a hole. It's just a depression. That's a fossa here. And so we've got two fossas over here as well. You can see they're small, but they're there. So the larger one, the individual one, is going to be the back, where down here is going to be the front. So this is anterior, this is posterior. So whenever you look at this, the big thing you want to figure out also is the head. Okay, the head is always going to be pointing medially. So on this one be medial. This is looking at the back of this. So if I picked it up and I was putting it in anatomical position, it would sit like this. So this one would be a right arm. Okay, this one here would also be a right arm. So we're actually looking at the exact same side, just looking at two different aspects of it. So when we look at the structures of your humerus, there's quite a few of them. So I want to talk about some of those real quick, and I'm going to move this guy out of the way and kind of show you some of the larger structures. So when you're looking at the top, the head, right? So the head is where this ball is. You're going to notice two bumps. There's one here and there's one here. The larger one is the greater tubercle, and the smaller one is the lesser tubercle. Okay, so greater tubercle, lesser tubercle. We then are going to have something different between the surgical neck and the anatomical neck. So the anatomical neck, when you look at this, okay, the head of the humerus it kind of blends into the rest of it. So if you look very carefully, there's this line here, okay? That is the anatomical neck, okay? The surgical neck is actually further down. So anatomical neck is going to be a line that you can actually see. The surgical neck is going to be down kind of below the head and the tubercles. The next thing that you're going to see are some bumps on the bones. So when we talk about bumps on the bones, the thing you want to see is you want to see these kind of expansions outward, right? So these expansions outward are going to be that deltoid tuberosity. So when you see that extension, you're going to see that deltoid tuberosity. The next thing are the different types of fossas that I want to talk about real quick. So remember, this is back, this is front. So the one on the back is known as the Olecranon fossa. I'm going to explain why that is here in a little bit, but that big one is your Olecranon fossa. A big way to remember that, okay? So when we're looking at the back of the elbow right here, move this stuff out of the way. If you've ever hit your funny bone, you're hitting a nerve and not a bone. And the reason for that is as you bend your elbow, that Olecranon fossa right there is now exposed and your nerves are running through that. So as you bend your elbow and hit that area right there, you're hitting the nerve, which is why you see stars, why it hurts so bad, is that Olecranon fossa is allowing those nerves to come through. So you're hitting the nerves that are coming out of there. You never hit your funny bone when your arm is extended. It's always when it's slightly bent or fully bent, because your nerves are now exposed, because that Olecranon fossa is now exposed. So that's going to be the back of the arm, is that Olecranon fossa. On the front of the arm, you're going to have these two indentations, okay? So when you're looking at the two indentations, remember when we talk about medial, wherever the head is pointed is going to be the medial location, okay? The medial indentation here is the coronoid fossa, okay? The lateral indentation here is the radial fossa, and the reason it's called the radial fossa is because the radius is going to be sitting in this location, okay? So medial is going to be your, it's going to be your coronoid fossa, and then the lateral is going to be that radial fossa. Below that is where you're going to start seeing something known as the trochlear and the capitulum. So same thing here. So when you're looking at the trochlea, okay, the trochlea is where the ulna is going to sit. So this is the ulna here. So the trochlea is this area here. There's kind of an indentation right in the center of it. So that right there is the trochlea. Right here is the trochlea. The side next to it, so this is the anterior side, remember, this is the capitulum. The capitulum is underneath that radial fossa. So where the capitulum is, right above it, is the radial fossa. So that's the capitulum, okay? And your radius is going to sit here, which we'll talk about here in a second. The other thing that you're going to need to know are some medial and lateral epicondyles, okay? So first thing is we got to figure out medial versus lateral. So on these two, this is both medial, this is both lateral. How do I know? I'm looking at where the head is pointed. So if the head is pointed this way, this is medial, this is lateral. Condyles refer to these bumps. So these two here, okay, these two bumps, they're medial. These are the medial epicondyles. And then over here, these two bumps are the lateral epicondyles. Just always look for that center. That center is going to be medial, outside is going to be lateral. So medial epicondyle and lateral epicondyle. So that is the humerus, okay? So when we look at this stuff, now I kind of want to talk about the radius and the ulna and mix it together with the actual humerus because it'll make a little more sense. So here we're looking at the radius, okay? So whenever we look at this, I want you guys to notice that you see this kind of at the bottom here. You see how you have this extended part here, okay? Remember, the radius is closest to your thumb, so if you've ever felt those two bumps on either side of your wrist, okay, those are the styloid processes of the radius and the ulna. So this is that styloid process of the radius, okay? The head of the radius, the reason it's called the radius is because if you guys know the radius of a circle, right? Radius refers to something that has to do with a circle. The head of the radius is a circle. So if you look at that, it looks circular. So up here is the head of the radius. You also notice that we have this nice bump right here. Okay, that bump on the radius close to the head, okay, is going to be that radial tuberosity. The other thing that you're going to need to know is we have a notch, and that notch is actually at the base. So wherever the styloid process is, right across from that, we have a notch for the ulna, where the ulna is going to sit inside of it. So that's called the ulnar notch. So when we're looking at this, okay, the head over here is going to meet with the capitulum of the humerus. The way to remember that is the cap on the head, okay? The radial fossa is up here. We then have the radial tuberosity, and then down here, you have the styloid process, which is that bump that you feel on your wrist, and then over here, you can see this is the ulna, and you can see how it's sitting inside of that little notch right there. So when we're looking at this, styloid process is this thing, so the notch is going to be on the other side of it, okay? This big bump, radial tuberosity, head of the radius, okay? So when you're looking at the arm, okay, looking at the arm, you're going to have the cap, the capitulum of the humerus sitting on the head of the radius, cap on the head, okay? Then the radial fossa is going to be right above that. Let's talk about the ulna now. Okay, when you look at the ulna, okay, you kind of have a skinnier end and you have this larger end. The larger end is the head of the ulna. When you turn it sideways, it looks like a U. Okay, so that looks like a U. That's the ulna. It's a relatively small bone as well. So just like the radius had that projection downward here, the ulna has the same thing. It's just not as noticeable. So this right here is going to be the styloid process of the ulna. Okay, and so just like we had the notch on the radius, the notch, the radial notch on the ulna is actually toward the head. So this area right here is the notch where that radius is going to sit inside of. So it's going to sit just like that. So that's going to be the notch for the radius. So it's the radial notch that's actually on the ulna. So remember how we had the trochlea up here, right, on the humerus? The trochlea is going to meet with the trochlear notch. Okay, so the trochlear notch, literally this notch here, is sitting on that trochlea, hence the name trochlea and trochlear notch. The notch is that U that the trochlea is going to sit inside of. Okay, the top is known as the olecranon. Guys, remember the Olecranon fossa on the back, so the Olecranon is going to kind of match with that Olecranon fossa. If you remember the coronoid fossa here, okay, the coronoid fossa is going to match with the coronoid of the ulna. So the top is basically the Olecranon. So this bump here is the Olecranon. This bottom here is going to be that coronoid. So Olecranon goes into the Olecranon fossa on the back of the humerus, and then the coronoid is going to be on the side of that coronoid fossa. Okay, and then the trochlea, this thing here, is going to sit inside of that trochlear notch on the ulna. Once again, the projection downward is the styloid process of the ulna. Okay, this entire thing is the head of the ulna, and then we have the radial notch. The radial notch is this indentation here, kind of on the coronoid. On the other side of it, you'll notice there's like a, almost like a piece missing. That's the notch on that, on the ulna. So you can kind of see that a lot of the names on the humerus and on the radius and the ulna kind of go together. So I'm going to kind of reiterate those again. So this is the trochlea here on the humerus. It fits inside the trochlear notch. The back of the humerus has the Olecranon fossa. The Olecranon of the ulna is going to go into that location. This piece here is the coronoid. Okay, so this bottom here of that ulna is going to fit kind of along. It's going to sit here. And so when you kind of bend, that coronoid is going to go into, you can see it go into that coronoid fossa. So that fossa right there is that coronoid fossa. And then we've got the capitulum. The capitulum is going to sit on the head of the radius. And so that's going to be the radial fossa here. So wherever the capitulum is, the radial fossa is above it. Trochlea, you're going to have the coronoid fossa above it. On the back, the larger one is the Olecranon fossa. Once again, on the ulna, the Olecranon, top portion of the head. Coronoid is going to be that bottom. Radial notch is the notch on the side here. The trochlear notch is the U of the ulna. So that U right there is the ulnar, or the trochlear notch. On the bottom, we've got the styloid process, which is kind of going to be projecting just a little bit further down, okay, than the rest of it. So that's the ulna. Once again, this is the radius. Head is the circular top. We've got the radial tuberosity, got the styloid process of the radius, and then down here we have the ulnar notch. That's where the ulna is going to sit inside of the radius.